Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are doing another Spotlight On. Now I know it's been a minute since I've done one of these, so I am super excited to do this one. And today we are going to talk about Edgar Allan Poe's murder mystery dinner party. So, basic information, this is a web series that is hosted here on YouTube over at the channel Shipwrecked. I'll leave links down below, of course. But this is so the premise of this is that Edgar Allan Poe decides to host a murder mystery dinner party, and he invites a bunch of very famous authors. And before they can even get into the murder mystery game, somebody is killed, and they need to solve the the mystery of who did it as they are getting picked off one by one. Now, this is so the series itself is there's a prologue, 11 primary episodes, and then an epilogue. So 13 episodes total. They range in length from 7 minutes to 18 and a half minutes, although that's only one episode and it's like the last one that is that long. But I added it up, and all told, this series ends up being about 2 hours long. So, like a movie. So one of the interesting things, of course, is that Edgar Allan Poe invites a lot of authors to this particular dinner party. So just so you know who they are, it is all the people that are invited are Edgar Allan Poe, of course, because he's the host. He is co-hosting it with the ghost that haunts him, Lenore. He invites the next door neighbor that he is desperately in love with, Annabelle Lee, and she brings her boyfriend Eddie, and then the rest are authors. And so you have Fyodor Dostoevsky, you have Emily Dickinson, H.G. Wells, Mary Shelley, Louisa May Alcott, Ernest Hemingway, Agatha Christie, Charlotte Bronte, Oscar Wilde, and George Eliot. Now, I don't know if all of these people were actually contemporaries, but like, it's for fun. So they all show up to this murder mystery party. As we are in the basic information, I do want to mention one thing, and that is that there is a seance in this, and like, I'm not really sure how I feel about this seance, mostly because, like, especially upper class seances from like 1800s, early 1900s, they definitely took bits and pieces from other cultures to make it more real, especially if the person doing the seance was very white. And so it wasn't always respectful to other cultures. And in this, it's definitely exaggerating that kind of old-timey seance and poking fun at it, but it's based off of something that in and of itself was frequently disrespectful. So I don't really know how to feel about that. Like, and how it was handled, like, it wasn't bad, but I don't know. Maybe I'm being very sensitive, but I did want to mention it because I know other people would like to know. But I think a lot of people will be just fine, just as a heads up, though. So, because this is a spotlight on, obviously, I want to convince you to watch this. So, we're going to talk about a lot of positives here. But the very first thing that I think was done really, really well is that this is, in fact, a comedy. It is silly, it is irreverent, it's goofy, and it just, even for being a murder mystery, which is like they're literally, somebody is dying every episode, and it's still so funny. And so I thought that the comedy itself was done really well, especially because how this particular series was written, it mostly set up this situation that in and of itself is kind of weird, but as long as you accept that all these authors would come to this murder mystery, a lot of the natural frictions that take place are great places to exploit for comedy, if that makes sense. So you have like, so all of these authors were written in such a way that it really leans into a lot of the stereotypes of them. So you have Emily Dickinson, the utter shut-in that nobody seems to like know who she is, or you have Oscar Wilde, who is just absolutely over the top and flamboyant. And when you put so many people in the same room that have these really big personalities, there's always going to be friction. There's always going to be these points that you can really like slip some comedy in very naturally. And then, of course, some characters are just hilarious. Oscar Wilde is great. He is just just generally a funny character. George Eliot is also hilarious. So, for those of you that don't know, George Eliot is a pen name for a female author. And so in this particular series, Lauren Lopez, the actress, is playing George Eliot, who, well, she's playing the woman who is trying to pass as the man George Eliot, if that makes sense. And so and it's very unconvincing. And so a lot of, anytime George Eliot speaks, it's just kind of hilarious because everybody knows that George Eliot is a woman, and like they're just trying really hard to not like, they just kind of ignore it. They're like, okay, whatever. We're not gonna like burst this person's bubble that we actually know that she's a female person. And it's just funny. But like, there's also this general tension between everybody where this is a group of peers, and it's really hard to kind of find peers at this particular like late 1800s, early 1900s, because there's not a lot of authors out there. And so these are people who really understand what they're going through, but they're also kind of competitors. And there's this very delicious tension between those two things that, again, it kind of ends up exploited for comedy. So you get some people like kind of throwing shade at each other's works, and it's just amusing. And then the other thing that kind of causes friction is that, which I think was an interesting choice, is that Lenore the ghost is actually an embodiment of like our modern times 20-something-year-old. And so her mannerisms, what she's doing, everything is very, very modern, which feels a little weird sometimes, but what it does allow for is her to comment on what everybody else is doing in a way that nobody else could, that again is very funny and points out kind of the absurdity of what other people are saying or doing. And I think it was done very well. And because of all of this stuff, how it was written, it didn't really ever feel like the writers were reaching for comedy and reaching really hard to make it funny. It's just that comedy kind of naturally happened in the spaces that were allowed to be, if that makes sense. So I think that even though a lot of the jokes, or not a lot, but some of the jokes really didn't land for me, I did appreciate that it didn't feel like they were trying too hard either. And I definitely laughed at some of it. So I think that there's a lot of comedy. There's a lot of different types of comedy in this, and I think there is something for everyone. And then, like I said, it doesn't feel like they're trying too hard. So I think that they did that very well. So next, let's talk about the plot. I do think that it had a very solid plot. You don't know who the killer is. It's written in such a way, it's filmed in such a way that honestly, it could be anybody that's there. I mean, you definitely have suspicions, like I don't think it's that person, but you don't ever know for sure until the very end when there's like the confession of who done it. And so I thought that was really, really well done. The ending is also good. I really wish there were more people alive at the end so they could have this little nice found family. But honestly, I still liked how it ended. The only thing I had a problem with in the plot, and I do want to mention this because it's something that I think other people will have a problem with, is that the solution to the mystery was unsatisfying, in the sense of like, honestly, how I always kind of thought of it is that something that's a mystery is something where you could also solve it, right, as an audience member. Whereas like if you can't, it's more of a thriller. But so this is a mystery that can't really be solved by the audience. And so there is one clue, but as to that would help you solve it, but it kind of requires on some esoteric knowledge that most people aren't going to have. And so with that, like when you get to that confession that this is who did it part of this series, it all makes sense. It really, really does. It is explained how the killer killed everybody. It all makes sense. But like I said, it doesn't feel very satisfying because there really wasn't any way that you were going to be able to figure that out. And so I did not love that. So Everything else about the plot, though, I thought was really good and just like really pulled me from one episode to the next. Next, let's talk about the acting. So there are some standout actors in this particular series. First and foremost, I want to mention again Lauren Lopez as George Eliot, because Lauren Lopez's comedic timing is off the hook. She is so good at it, but also there's a physicality to her comedy as well. She's playing a woman who is trying to pass as a man and failing, and like this woman also clearly doesn't, she just doesn't know how to be a man, and she understands that like men stand differently, but she's just super awkward about it because she doesn't know how men stand. And Lauren Lopez nails that physicality so well, and when paired with the comedic timing, it's just a great character. I also want to mention Tom DeTrinis as Oscar Wilde, because again, the comedic timing is off the hook. He went all in on like flamboyant, over the top characterization of Oscar Wilde, which is spot on and lovely to see. But the thing that I thought he did really well is actually the facial expressions, because the facial expressions are definitely over the top, but in a believable, this is what a flamboyant man would do kind of way. And it just, again, it really ties his entire character together in such a lovely way. And so I think that those two definitely were standouts on the acting. Also doing really well that I want to mention is Ashley Clements as Charlotte Bronte, because really her body language really sells this high class snob of a character. It's just really well done. So you believe that she's just so horrible to be around, offset too. And I think that that's really, she just did a really good job. And then the last thing I want to mention for standout for acting is Sean Prasad as Edgar Allan Poe. Now, I think that as Edgar Allan Poe, he was convincing as a socially awkward Edgar Allan Poe. However, I don't think it was standout, except for one scene. And he did this one scene so well, and it was just such a gut punch. And I had to mention it because it was just really well done. Everyone else that I did not mention was solid. Now, this is like an independent company doing like a web series. So there are moments where the acting maybe isn't as good as you would expect, but there's nothing that tanks it, which is something that occasionally happens. So I want to mention that no, there are definitely moments that could be better, but there's nothing that really truly tanks the series, which is excellent. But I do want to mention that the one thing that I did think was not as well done was there is a large fight scene that just, some parts of it are more believable than others. And like when you kind of think about it, you're like, okay, like it's all the actors, so there's no stunt doubles. They don't want to actually hit each other. They're limited by budget and like the different editing, like time and edits and all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense. But there's at least one punch where I was just like, that's not even close to believable. Like, thankfully there is only one major fight scene, so it's not a big problem. But just a heads up, the fight scene is not great. But other than that, the acting, like I said, is very solid. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention that I thought was standout for this particular series is how the group dynamics were written. And it's like I mentioned this before with the comedy aspect of it, but this is a group of a lot of people coming together, big personalities, they're peers, but they're also competitors. They don't really know how to handle that. So sometimes they're throwing shade and being like, that's almost as hacky as like anything you've ever written. Or like sometimes they're like really actually genuinely appreciative of things. There's a moment where Mary Shelley stands up and says, I have something to say. And then she says her thing, and she does make a point, but it's in a very lovely kind of way. And Oscar Wilde is just like, oh, beautiful, and like Mary Shelley does the nose scrunch, thank you, that kind of thing back at him. And it's beautiful. And so like you have that, like, people, they by turns do not know really how to interact with each other, which makes sense, especially given that nobody seems to understand what the purpose of this group is. They don't know, is this like supposed to be a group of like-minded peers that just kind of comes together and talks shop? Is this supposed to be a group that like becomes friends and like becomes a very core part of the social each person's social group? Is this just like something else? Nobody seems to know, and everybody has a different idea of what it seems to be. And like it's not super, like it's not explored explicitly, but you can tell that how each person kind of interacts with the rest of the group, they definitely have a different idea of like what the purpose of the group is. um and that's really interesting as well. But the thing that I think that they did, the writers, Sean and Sinead Prasad, did really, really well is that this is also very clearly a group where they know of each other. And a lot of them have met in at other events. They may consider themselves acquaintances, but they've never come together as a large group before. And when you have a group of 11, 12 people, you're going, like the first time they all come together, you're going to get these really interesting dynamics that naturally form, from enmity to like, oh no, I think we actually like each other and could be friends, to everything in between. And all of that kind of very naturally happened, and it was mostly in the background, but it was still done really well, that it was so believable. And I just really like appreciated the subtlety of it as we were focusing more on the murder mystery, more on the comedy. But this was very much in the background and still very, very well done. So that's it, you guys. Those are all the things that I really, really love about this series. It just, I mean, it makes me laugh. It's a bit of levity that is still also just done really well for other reasons. And I really do hope that you go ahead and check it out. But that's all I have, you guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. But that's it. So until next time, have happy reading or watching. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.